Hey, let's talk about individual players, players that you've seen that had anxiety. Maybe it's the death of a parent or something, some big event in their life. As a coach, talk a little bit about the impact of that and how you walk through that with players, how you address those things. It's become a bigger deal than it was even in 2012. A little more talked about, at least.
Right. Yeah, I think we're making some progress actually in this area outside of coaches and all that kind of stuff, and recognizing that there are people that struggle. My freshman year at the University of Tulsa, I identified with this a little bit. My parents were going through this incredibly messy split, and I didn't really have anybody that I could talk with about it, and so I internalized it, and I know that it impacted my schoolwork. It was my worst semester at the University of Tulsa. I wasn't playing well as a true freshman, which it was hard for me because I was used to playing well and being focused, and I had no focus. And quite honestly, I kind of took that on down the road with me a little bit, and I certainly wasn't perfect in this. I don't know that anybody can be. But when someone was starting to change, their attitude was changing. They didn't seem to be as upbeat. They didn't seem to be as focused. Quite honestly, I always call them in. Hey, did you get something going on in your life? Let's talk about it. And a lot of times, many times it would be, "No, coach, I'm this and that." I said, "Well, if you do want to talk about something, you can come in and talk to me." And you just leave the door open, because trying to force the issue, sometimes they're not ready to communicate something. They haven't processed everything yet. But I'll be honest with you, it is hard. I mentioned social media earlier, and I said I'm not on it. And I'm not condemning anybody that is. I just know that as a coach, if I'd been on social media, I don't, anxiety and all the other
There was
things.
somebody saying something about how to coach.
Yeah, there might have been somebody that said something about how to coach or what I was doing wrong or what. I don't know that. I think it's just better sometimes to get yourself away from those distractions. I always termed them the peripheral opponents. You have the team across from you that you're getting ready to play on Saturdays, and obviously that's the opponent. But there's all the peripheral opponents. It's class. It's girlfriends. It's family. It's a relationship. A fight with another player. I mean, there's all these things that keep us from focusing on who the real opponent is.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that real opponent's not on Saturdays. It's just making an A on a test or
those things become part of the stress bucket that we all carry, and when that stress bucket gets too full, our reactions become different, attitudes, reactions, different things. And what you're saying, the way we say it, is we got to ask the right question, not just what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you.
Right.
So you're asking, come on, let's talk about it.
Yep.
Right? Here's another thing, a little different, I think, at the college level than maybe high school. But part of what opens kids up to talking is an environment that they feel comfortable in. And a lot of players, by the time, if you call them to come to their office, by the time they get there, they're nutted up enough to where they're just afraid of what's going to happen, right? And so one of the things that good coaches can do, I'm going to talk to you while we play catch.
Yeah.
I'm going to spot you here and give you an opportunity to talk. We're going to walk the field here and talk.
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden you've given that kid in a more regulated environment an opportunity to find out what's going on.
No, I agree. I used to use the moment coming off the field after practice, and when someone really had a bad day or maybe a bad week, or I could see something was kind of going on that they weren't sharing, I would walk off the field with them, and I would kind of throw my arm around them, and I'd slowly start moving to the side where really nobody could necessarily hear, not necessarily trying to get that moment to be one to where they were sharing. Sometimes they would. But just saying, hey, it seems like you got something you want to talk about. Yeah, just open the door and have your arm around them. And, you'd have a little walk back generally from the practice field back to the locker room anyway. And I did this with everybody. When I walked off the field, I threw my arm around somebody every day. Sometimes it wasn't because I was feeling like that they had something wrong. I just didn't want that moment for everybody on the team to go, uh-oh,
Yeah, that's the guy.
That's the guy that's got a problem. He's got his arm around him. So every time I came off the field,
That's good.
I had a player that I picked out or did just say, man, you had a great day today. I'm proud of you.
So you were predictable. They knew that was something Coach did, right? Well, that predictability is, again, it's stabilizing, right? If I don't know how Coach is going to respond, then my reaction to what I did on practice is going to be different, right? But if I know every day that's what Coach does, he's going to put his arm around you, he's going to find out what's going on, and he's going to do that with all of us, then, boy, my mental state is in a much more calm, regulated position.
I totally agree with what you just said. I think consistency from leadership and especially the head coach is one of the most important things that you do because of what you just said. When you have that, there are no surprises, right? And I think surprises sometimes they can create positive reactions, but again, it's not responses. Again, it's reactions, right? And because they're surprised.
Yeah.
And so that idea that all of a sudden everybody knows, the coaching staff knows, the players know, the support staff knows, when this happens, this is how we're handling it. Sometimes it might be about a situation, sometimes even an individual player that maybe crossed the line. Okay, and guess what? Now you get,
Yeah. This is an oversimplification, but everything that happens, all your senses, external and internal senses, come in through the survival part of your brain, the brain stem, and they get sorted largely into one of three categories. It sorts by familiar good, familiar bad, or unfamiliar. And so every experience is in one of those three categories. The brain goes into alert for familiar bad, but it also goes to alert for unfamiliar, which we know that, right? Because some of the scariest things is when we don't know what's going to happen, rather than sometimes that's scarier than knowing something bad's about to happen.
yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
And so as a coach, if I understand that, you've just made predictability a lot bigger thing for my athlete to perform well.
No, I really believe that's one of the most important traits of a head coach is consistency and where everyone knows how you're going to handle a situation.
Okay, so you've got an assistant coach whose reactions aren't consistent. Maybe he's sometimes on a player a little harder, or he's just not consistent in what he's doing. And you're for him too, right?
Sure.
So coach him up.
Emotions get the best of us at times, and there's time frames whenever I probably emotionally let things get involved
Sure.
in the decision or how I handled something. But I tried to take that out of it again because I think emotion leads to unpredictability, generally speaking. But when I would talk to coaches all the time about whether you agree with how I do things or not, I'm the only constant in the room. I remember a head coach at one point in time, I won't say who, basically kind of told me, he said, as the head coach, the benefit of being the head coach is the fact that your job is to please me. It is not my job to please you. And I remember hearing that, and I had a tremendous amount of respect for this head coach. But I think that at that point in time, it was kind of like, okay, in order for me to be a good assistant, I need to figure out what this head coach has that is unique to them that they want me to do. And I certainly worked for a lot of different great head coaches. I was with Johnny Majors and John Cooper and Pat Jones, and I can keep going down the list, and I won't. Larry Coker, but they all were different, how they handled things and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't necessarily always agree with them, but I always did agree with the fact that they were the boss. They were the only constant in the program. Every coach, every player was going to be leaving that program except for that individual. And sometimes they do too, but the bottom line is they're the one that has to live throughout the duration of all this. And so I would try to focus my attention a little bit on that. And I would tell the assistant, here's my expectation. Okay. And if they weren't meeting that expectation, or if they were meeting the expectation, I always told them. And they always knew that they were going to get feedbacks, sometimes really positive, maybe sometimes not as positive. But here was my expectation until I grew them up into, and I was so fortunate that I was a head coach at 3 different places head coach for a total of 14 years, sometimes a little break in between, But my end staff, I had guys that had been with me the entirety of that time frame, 14 years, even though we'd had breaks in between. They would come back.
Right.
And it was really good for me too, because I didn't have to worry about, I knew they were going to be coaching the same way that I would want to coach a player. Okay. And so I wasn't having to coach the coaches, so I could really focus on the other aspects of it.